The school stood silent under the heavy weight of midnight. The wind moved slowly through the broken windows, making a low whistling sound that echoed across the empty halls. Arman tightened his grip on his flashlight as he stepped through the rusted gate, his heart already beating faster than usual. He had heard the stories many times. Students whispering about strange sounds, shadows moving on their own, and a classroom that no one dared to enter after dark. Tonight, he wanted to see if those stories were real, or just fear playing tricks. The main door creaked loudly as he pushed it open. The sound echoed too long, too deep, as if the building itself was awake. Dust floated in the air, glowing faintly in the weak beam of his light. Arman stepped inside. The hallway was darker than he expected. The walls were cracked, and old lockers stood slightly open, like they were watching him. Something felt wrong, but he kept moving forward. Then he saw it at the end of the corridor. A door, unlike the others, this one was closed, completely still. And written across it in faded red paint were the words, "Do not enter after midnight." Arman swallowed hard, but he didn't turn back. Arman stood frozen in front of the door. The red words looked darker the longer he stared at them, as if they were still wet. His flashlight flickered once, then steadied again. He reached out slowly, his hand shaking without control. The moment his fingers touched the handle, a cold chill ran through his entire body. It wasn't just fear. It felt alive, like something on the other side knew he was there. Watching, waiting, he tried to pull his hand back, but for a second, he couldn't move. His breath grew heavy. The silence around him became too loud, pressing against his ears like a deep hum. Then a whisper, soft, slow. Right behind the door, Arman. He stepped back instantly, his heart slamming against his chest. His name. Something inside had called his name. That was impossible. No one knew he was here. The whisper came again. This time closer, clearer. Come. Inside, the voice was not human. It dragged each word, stretching it into something broken and wrong. Arman's flashlight flickered violently now, light jumping across the walls like something was moving with it. He turned around quickly, ready to run, but the hallway had changed. The lockers were now fully open. Dark inside. Too dark. And from within them, something seemed to shift. Slowly, Arman froze as the door slowly opened behind him, the sound stretching unnaturally through the hallway like a long, painful scream, and he could feel cold air spilling out, crawling across the floor toward his feet, carrying a strange smell, something old, something rotten, something that did not belong in this world. He wanted to run, but his legs refused to move. Locked in place by a fear so deep it felt like it had roots inside his body, and the flashlight in his hand began shaking violently, its weak beam now pointing toward the dark space behind him without his control. From inside the classroom, something shifted, not like a person moving, but like a shape trying to remember how to exist. And Arman slowly turned his head, inch by inch, until his eyes met the darkness inside, where no light seemed strong enough to reach. Then he saw it. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to understand that it was wrong. A tall figure standing too still. Its body stretched in ways that did not match human form, and its face. Its face was hidden, yet somehow staring directly at him. The whisper returned again. Now louder, now closer. No longer from the room, but right behind his ear. As if it had crossed the distance without moving, and it spoke slowly, dragging each word like a broken echo from something long forgotten in darkness. Arman stumbled forward as the whisper clung to him, like cold breath, and his body finally responded, forcing him into motion. But the hallway ahead no longer looked the same. The walls seemed longer, stretching into darkness, and every step he took felt slower, as if the ground itself resisted him. He tried to focus on the exit door he had entered from. But it was gone, replaced by more hallway, more shadows, more silence that pressed tightly around him, and the sound of his footsteps echoed strangely, like someone else was walking just a second behind him. Arman turned quickly, shining his flashlight behind him, but saw nothing except the open classroom door far away, still leaking darkness like smoke. And for a brief second, he thought he saw the tall figure standing closer than before. Though it had not made a sound, his breathing became uneven as he kept moving forward. Faster now, almost running, but the hallway twisted slightly, bending where it should not, and the lockers along the walls began to slam shut one by one, each loud bang echoing like a warning he could not understand. Then suddenly, all the noise stopped, and Arman found himself standing in complete silence again. Except now there was a door in front of him that had not been there before, and written across it in the same red paint were new words waiting for him. Arman stood still, staring at the new door, his chest rising and falling too fast, as the red words slowly became clear under his shaking light. And this time the message was different, written unevenly, like a hurried warning. The letters dripping downward as if they had been painted by trembling hands. The message read, "You should have left." And as he whispered the words under his breath, the air around him felt colder, heavier, like the building itself was reacting to his voice. And somewhere far behind him, a faint dragging sound began to echo again. Arman turned sharply, trying to locate the source of the sound. But the hallway behind him was darker now, deeper than before, and for a moment, he thought he saw multiple shapes moving along the walls, stretching and pulling themselves closer without making a clear form. His grip tightened around the flashlight as he stepped back toward the door, unsure whether going forward or turning back would be worse. And the silence returned again, sudden and complete, cutting off every sound as if something had forced the world to pause. Then, without warning, the door in front of him clicked softly, and the handle began to turn on its own, slowly, carefully, as if whatever was on the other side already knew he was there, already waiting, already certain that he would not escape. The door opened slowly, revealing a classroom that looked almost normal at first, with rows of old desks facing a dusty blackboard. But the air inside felt thick and unmoving, and Arman hesitated at the entrance, his instincts warning him not to step inside. He took one careful step forward, and the floor creaked beneath him louder than expected, echoing through the room in a way that felt unnatural. And as his flashlight moved across the desks, he noticed something strange. Every chair was slightly turned toward him. Arman swallowed hard and walked further in, his light now reaching the far wall where the blackboard stood, covered in faint marks that looked like erased writing. But as he stared longer, the shapes began to form letters, slowly becoming clear before his eyes. The message stretched across the board in uneven lines, repeating again and again, "We were left here." And as he stepped closer, the desks behind him made a soft scraping sound. Moving slightly across the floor without anyone touching them, Arman turned quickly, his heart racing as he saw the desks now facing him completely, perfectly aligned and in the far corner of the room. Something dark began to rise slowly from behind a desk, unfolding itself in a way no human body ever could. Arman stepped back as the dark shape continued to rise. His breath caught in his throat, and the classroom around him seemed to grow smaller, the walls pressing inward slowly, while the desks remained perfectly still, as if waiting for something to happen next. Arman stepped back as the dark shape continued to rise. His breath caught in his throat, and the classroom around him seemed to grow smaller, the walls pressing inward slowly, while the desks remained perfectly still, as if waiting for something to happen next. A sudden sound broke the silence. Soft at first, like fingers tapping gently on wood. and Arman slowly turned his head, realizing the sound was coming from the desks. One by one, each desk beginning to tap in a slow, uneven rhythm. The tapping grew louder, faster, until it filled the entire room, echoing against the walls, and Arman covered his ears. But the sound did not fade. Instead, it seemed to come from inside his head now, deep and sharp, like something trying to break through. Then everything stopped at once. And in that sudden silence, the figure moved again, just slightly. Just enough for Arman to notice that it was now closer than before. Though he had never seen it take a single step, Arman's body refused to respond as the figure stood closer now. Its shape clearer, but still wrong. And the air around him felt heavy, pressing against his chest, while the silence returned once again, deeper than before. As if the room itself was holding its breath, he slowly turned his head, trying to find another way out, but what he saw made his heart drop instantly. Because the desks were no longer empty, and seated in each chair were figures. Still and silent, their bodies facing forward. Their heads tilted slightly toward him. Arman's flashlight trembled as he pointed it toward them. And one by one, their faces became visible, pale and empty, with no eyes, no mouths, just smooth skin where features should have been. And yet he could feel them watching him without blinking. A cold wave passed through him as one of the figures slowly lifted its head higher than the others, its neck stretching slightly beyond normal limits, and then another followed, and another, until every single one of them was now fully turned Now fully turned toward him. The shadow near the corner moved again. And this time Arman saw its arm extend slowly, impossibly long, reaching across the space between them. And the moment its fingers twitched, the seated figures began to rise together. Without making a single sound, Arman stepped backward as the figures rose from their seats, his legs shaking badly, and the room seemed to tilt slightly, as if reality itself was losing balance, while the shadow in the corner stretched taller, its form scraping the ceiling without making a sound. He turned suddenly and ran toward the door he had entered from, his footsteps loud and uneven. But when he reached it and grabbed the handle, his heart sank instantly. Because the door would not move, it felt sealed, like it had never been meant to open again. Behind him, the sound of movement finally began. Not footsteps, but something softer, like fabric dragging slowly across the floor. And when he glanced back, the faceless figures were no longer at their desks. They were closer now, forming a loose circle around him. Arman's breath became sharp as he pressed his back against the door, his flashlight flickering wildly, the beam jumping from one empty face to another. And each time the light touched them, they seemed slightly closer, even though none of them appeared to walk. Then the tall shadow reached him, its long arm lowering slowly until it hovered just inches from his face. And though it had no features, no eyes, no mouth, Arman felt something worse than being seen. He felt something recognizing him. Arman could not move as the shadow's hand hovered before him, and the cold around it felt sharper than ice, pressing into his skin without touching, while the faceless figures stood completely still again, their silent presence closing in like walls around him. Then, without warning, the blackboard behind him made a loud, scraping sound, like chalk being dragged across its surface by an unseen force. And Arman's eyes shifted slowly toward it, even though every part of him screamed not to look. Asterisk letters began to form, uneven and jagged, appearing one after another, slow but clear. And Arman's breathing stopped as he realized what was being written. Not a message this time, not a warning, but something far more personal. The words stretched across the board in large, broken letters, and as soon as the final stroke appeared, every faceless figure tilted their heads at the same time, their attention shifting from the shadow directly to him. The shadow's hand moved closer, almost touching his face now, and a whisper returned. Not from one direction, but from everywhere at once, surrounding him, filling the room, speaking in a low, endless tone that carried something far worse than fear. Arman's knees hit the floor as the whisper filled every corner of the room. Low and hollow, and his flashlight flickered violently, casting jagged shadows across the walls. While the faceless figures began moving toward him, their movements silent yet deliberate, like predators circling without haste but with intent. He tried to crawl backward, but the floor seemed to stretch, elongating the distance to the door. And the desks now shifted subtly, scraping across the floor toward him, forming a labyrinth around his small space, trapping him between shadows and furniture that had a life of its own. From the back corner of the room, a soft tapping began again, faint at first, then faster, like fingernails drumming on wood, and Arman realized with a chill that the sound was not random, it was counting. Almost rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, but not his own. The tall shadow moved closer, bending unnaturally, stretching its arm over the desks. And from somewhere inside the darkness, Arman heard faint, almost childlike voices repeating his name. Soft and sorrowful, echoing as if from another time. Another world trapped within the school's walls. He realized then that the faceless figures were not empty. They were the students who had disappeared over the years. Trapped here, their eyes gone, their voices gone, leaving only shadows that waited for the next intruder, feeding on fear. Remembering him before he even knew his fate, Arman's hands shook as he pressed against the floor, trying to pull himself backward, but suddenly the ground beneath him shuddered. Tiny cracks spreading outward like spiderwebs, and he realized too late that the floor itself was alive, responding to the shadow's presence and feeding the fear it sensed. The faceless figures closed in, their blank faces just inches away, and the whispering rose into a chorus. Voices overlapping, calling his name endlessly, dragging out the syllables, making it impossible to ignore. While the room seemed to tilt and warp around him in impossible angles, a loud crack echoed suddenly as a section of the wooden floor splintered, and Arman's flashlight tumbled, rolling across the ground and illuminating the abyss that had opened beneath him. A deep black hole swallowing the floorboards, moving like liquid, ready to take him if he fell even a step. He scrambled desperately, hands digging into the splintered wood, and the shadows reached out with long, thin fingers, the faceless students leaning closer, the tall figure bending impossibly over them, all trying to push him toward the gaping void, whispering in tones both sorrowful and cruel. With a final effort, Arman pulled himself backward just as the floor cracked further, feeling the void hunger for him, the whispers screaming louder than ever. And he knew he had barely survived. Yet the school's darkness was not finished its memory. Its prisoners were still waiting. Arman stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air as the shadows from the classroom seemed to follow him, stretching along the cracked walls, and the whispering continued, soft and relentless, circling his head, making it impossible to tell which direction was safe or real. The lockers along the corridor groaned, swinging open and closed on their own, as if testing him, and faint light flickered from broken bulbs overhead, casting brief glimpses of twisted shapes between the walls, shapes that vanished when he tried to focus on them. Every step he took felt heavier, like gravity itself had grown denser, and the floorboards creaked under him, echoing through the silence of the empty school, while the distant sound of dragging feet followed, keeping pace with him without ever appearing. Arman tried to call out, but his voice barely left his lips before the whisper returned, echoing his own words in a distorted mockery. And he realized the sound was no longer coming from the classroom. It was everywhere, inside the walls, inside the ceiling. Inside him, he reached the end of the hallway, where a faint light hinted at an exit. But as he ran toward it, the shadows twisted unnaturally, forming barriers in front of him. And the voices grew louder, laughing softly. Almost like the school itself was alive and feeding on his panic. Arman skidded to a stop as the faint light revealed a door, glowing slightly at the end of the hallway. But when he reached out to touch it, the handle felt cold, heavy, and unfamiliar, as if it had never existed before, and the shadows behind him pressed closer. Waiting, he yanked on the handle. But it wouldn't budge, and as he pulled harder, a low groaning sound filled the corridor, rising in pitch, echoing off the cracked walls. Like the building itself was angry that he dared to try and leave. The shadows behind him shifted, moving faster now, their faceless forms twisting, limbs elongating. And he could feel the air around him tighten, pressing in, making each breath a struggle, while the whispers morphed into soft, pleading cries he couldn't ignore. Desperate, Arman kicked the door, hearing it slam against something solid. But the light beyond it flickered and went out, plunging the corridor into near total darkness. And now the shadows were not just behind him, they were above, below, all around. Moving silently with intent, he pressed his back against the door, shaking, feeling the faceless forms pressing against him, whispering his name, telling him to stay, to remember, to never leave. And in that instant, Arman realized the school's grip on him was more than fear, it was possession. Arman's flashlight flickered violently, casting fractured light across the hallway. And for a moment, everything froze. The shadows paused. The whispers stopped. The building itself seemed to hold its breath. But then the darkness surged forward, swallowing the floorboards and walls in black waves that reached for him. He ran blindly, tripping over broken tiles, his hands scraping against the walls, feeling the cold, rough surface, while behind him the faceless figures glided without sound, never gaining but never falling behind. Their silent presence a constant pressure on his mind and soul. The corridor twisted unnaturally as if it were alive, bending around him, stretching farther than it should. And Arman realized the exit he sought wasn't a door, wasn't a window, but some impossible path that shifted as he moved, forcing him to question whether he would ever escape. A low moan rose from the shadows, deep and guttural, vibrating through the floor, the walls, the ceiling, and Arman felt it inside his chest, pushing him forward, pulling him, telling him to keep moving, or be consumed entirely by the darkness that remembered him too well. Then, just ahead, a faint pinprick of light appeared, small but steady, and he lunged toward it, heart hammering, mind screaming, praying that it was real, praying it led somewhere outside, praying the school hadn't claimed him completely. As the shadows surged around him, whispering in voices older than memory, Arman reached the pinprick of light, his fingers brushing the edge of a doorframe that was solid, real and warm. But the shadows surged around him, their faceless forms pressing closer, whispering urgently, pulling EHS, demanding he turn back, warning him that stepping through would not be freedom. He hesitated, heart pounding, unsure if escaping would truly save him or simply lead him into another trap. And the whispering became louder, almost pleading, almost angry, filling the hallway with voices of every student who had ever vanished, every shadow claiming him as part of their own. Arman drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of the darkness pressing into his chest. And with a surge of desperate courage, he stepped forward, ignoring the icy hands that seemed to graze his arms, ignoring the invisible pressure that threatened to pull him back into the school's memory. The instant he crossed the threshold, the shadows recoiled, screaming silently, and the hallway behind him collapsed into darkness, swallowing the echoes of voices, leaving only silence. While the warmth of the outside world brushed his face, and Arman realized he had made it. Barely, but alive, he stumbled forward into the night, the wind cool on his skin, but the whispers had not fully left. They lingered faintly in his mind, a reminder that the school's memory would always be there. Waiting, patient, and that some doors, once opened, never truly close, even after Arman escaped into the cool night. The whispers clung to him like invisible chains, wrapping around his mind in soft, insistent murmurs, reminding him of the faceless figures, the tall shadow, the floor that had almost swallowed him. And he realized that the school's darkness was not gone, it had followed him. Every street lamp he passed flickered strangely. Every shadow seemed too long, and sometimes in reflections, he thought he saw faceless figures standing silently behind him, watching, waiting for the moment he let his guard down. A cold reminder that some places never truly release what they claim. Arman tried to speak of it, tried to tell someone, but the words came out garbled, twisted, as if the whispers themselves were twisting his voice, making sure no one would understand. And the memory of the classroom, the desks, the blackboard, and the tall shadow remained sharp in his mind. He knew the school would always remember him, would always call him back in whispers and shadows, and that he had been marked a survivor of something older than the town, older than the building, something that thrived on fear, patience, and the curiosity of the living. And as he disappeared into the darkness, the school loomed silently behind him, waiting for the next curious soul to enter, to hear the whispers, to see the faceless figures, and to learn that some stories never end. They only continue, feeding, remembering, and waiting.